one of the great pleasures of working in the publishing industry is having book launches. It's always exciting. It is always fantastic to be able to get a book that has taken all the time that it has to be written and then to launch it. So today, as you know, we're launching Cheryl Adam's second book, and I hope many of you have already read Lillian's Eden. And if you have, you'll be on the edge of your seat wanting to read this one. So just a brief bio for Cheryl. She was deported from Kenya in the 1960s. That's the story yet to come. And she arrived as an unwanted guest in Sweden. She later moved to South Africa, where she lived for 13 years and had 5 children before returning to Australia. After her husband's stroke, she took up study, completing a master's in fine arts at Monash University before taking up writing. And her book, Lillian's Eden, was published at her ripe old age of 74. So Out of Eden is her second book, but next month you'll also be able to read a wonderful story by Cheryl that's in our anthology, Not Dead Yet, Feminism, Passion and Women's Liberation, and it'll make you laugh. It's made all of us laugh. The other thing is that it's such a pleasure to be able to do this. I first met Cheryl, I think I met Cheryl because she came and knocked on the door at Spinifex and wanted to put up a display. And then we met and we went ahead and did it. That was probably about 10 years ago. And then we met in the Philippines at a conference. So we've managed to continue going on with that. Now, the launcher this evening is Loretta Smith. Loretta has written a fabulous book, and after you've finished reading Out of Eden, you should run out and buy her book, A Spanner in the Works. It's a book about the first woman to run a women's only garage. Alice Anderson was her name. I came across her name in the early 90s and was very fascinated by her. So I was really pleased when Loretta wrote a book about her so I could find out a whole lot more about Alice Anderson. So I'm just going to hand over to Loretta now, who will launch Out of Eden.
Thank you, Susan. And Cheryl, it's been an absolute pleasure to read both Lillian's Eden and Out of Eden. And I don't think I would have appreciated Out of Eden as much if I hadn't read the backstory, really, with Lillian's Eden. So I would suggest to people that haven't read Lillian's Eden and are interested in Out of Eden that you really, even though Out of Eden can be a standalone book, I would highly suggest that you read Lillian's Eden first, because there you get the backstory in the 1950s of the McKinley family. And Lillian is the main character. And there's Eric, the husband, and their 3 then young children. And of course, Aunt Maggie, who is just such a fabulous character. I really, really enjoyed it. And I wanted to ask you, Cheryl, why did you choose this particular time in history to write about? So the first book's the 1950s and the second book's the 1960s.
Well, the first book, I think I started writing because my husband had had a stroke and I needed something aside from being a carer. And I got into writing, and I guess I was looking back at things in my life, and I grew up in the town of Eden, which the book was based in. So that's how Out of Eden came about. And of course, after Out of Eden, there was a sort of a request for more books. So I thought, well, maybe I can do a sequel. And COVID hit. And I thought, perfect.
Best thing that can happen to a writer is COVID lockdown.
It's a terrible thing to say, but I guess it stopped me going nuts. And once again, with Out of Eden, I sort of looked back on events in my life, I think, and mixed a bit of truth and fiction, and hence Out of Eden came back. Like, was easy for me to write quicker. Like, the first one took me 12 years. This one took me COVID a year. And I've even started the third one now. So hopefully COVID ends. I'd rather COVID ended before book 3 ended, to be truthful. But I just, yes, it's writing sort of took a hold of me, I think. And I guess you look back on your life when you get older and things mean different, like life is different. So that's sort of how it came about.
Yeah, well, I guess whether it's fiction or non-fiction, we often put a bit of ourselves in there. And from looking at your bio, you've had all sorts of interesting things happen to you in various countries, including Sweden, where we, in Out of Eden, meet Maureen, who is now the grown daughter, the baby daughter of Lillian, and we're thrown straight into her being in Sweden and being abandoned, pregnant, left on the streets, which is absolutely fascinating. And I did wonder, it's interesting that you lived in Eden, because I instantly thought, oh yes, Cheryl's got a sense of humour here, and I'm thinking she's thinking of the Garden of Eden, which, you know, it started out as Lillian's Eden and it was anything but. And I guess Out of Eden, to me, feels like, yes, we need to escape from paradise somehow, which was not paradise. So have you got anything to say on that, Cheryl?
I think we're always looking for an Eden somewhere in our existence. And I grew up in the town of Eden, which really is a very beautiful place. So I think I sort of married the two ideas. And if you think of Sweden, Eden is actually, it's S-W-E-D-E-N. So there's a perfect place to place the story as well. So there was a little bit of, although I did live in Sweden for a while, and yes, I was an unmarried mother. I did have problems in Sweden, so I based my story around that and around the knowledge of a young woman who is in a desperate situation, and how resilience comes in, how she has to rely on help from all different spheres of life, people, and particularly women. I think women are very sort of empathetic towards others and have a greater understanding. And so it was sort of from this personal knowledge of knowing what it was like to, in the 60s in particular, to be an unmarried mother, where you know, you were discriminated against horrendously because you ended up in homes for unmarried mothers, or you ended up having to have abortions. It was always the women's fault. It was never the male. And I think I needed to look at that whole situation, having sort of been a part of it myself, and then you know, working it into the story and creating the story around that. So I think it's very important. I think it's important for women to understand what it was like, especially today when everything is acceptable. Like single parenting is, you can go to IV and you can actually be a single parent and choose to have an IV child, whereas it was unheard of for us. In actual fact, probably, if I think about it, the only time our creator got it right was when they created the seahorse, because then, you know, if you know what happens with the seahorse, at least the male shares into the productivity of or production of a child. So yes, I was going to read an extract from the book. I don't know if you'd like to hear a couple of extracts.
Yeah, absolutely. So at what point are you going to read?
Well, after your when it's comfortable for everybody.
Okay, sure. Well, I was really I wasn't aware that you'd actually lived in Sweden yourself, but it makes sense because what you portray is something very real, even though the characters are slightly heightened for drama, which happens with any good drama. They're very believable, and you know, there's quite an ambivalence I felt to some of the characters. And I also had that sense of Sweden. You set it in winter, which makes it even the conditions even more harsh. And the comparison, as we finally get back to Lillian and Eden again, it is so stark, because, you know, it seems to be always warm and sunny and they're by the sea, and while Lillian's looking out at the ocean, her poor old daughter Maureen is sludging through ice and snow in Sweden. So I found that contrast really interesting, and I think even more so than Lillian's Eden, because you've set it in two countries, and we have the understanding of Lillian and the family when the children were young, and then to have Maureen as a young grown woman that has, you know, wanted to have an adventure and actually worked very hard and paid for a one-way ticket to Sweden. That's an incredibly brave thing to do, even in the 60s. And I wanted to know what your thoughts were on how much did you see Lillian, who also had that sense of adventure and romance, which kind of clouded both Lillian and Maureen's partnerships or romances, because they kind of fell into something with this romantic ideal that was much more something that women were encouraged to, and men were encouraged to fall for in the 50s and 60s. And I think we've really had the scales pulled from our eyes, most of us anyway, to that experience. But how much did you see Lillian and now her daughter Maureen as victims of the time, of their circumstances, as opposed to suffering the consequences of their own decision making?
Well, as a matter of fact, I originally was going to call the story How Far the Apple Falls, because there is that similarity, although I guess the 60s had moved on, but for Lillian, she was also an immigrant to Australia, and it was a wartime. So her war experience, you know, to escape the war in London, because also they'd been through a First World War as well. So she came into Australia, into rural Australia, but rural Australia wasn't so forgiving perhaps as a city. You can't lose yourself, your identity, you're very exposed in a small town. And so there is a similarity in both characters in what how their lives progress. One being caught in a situation in Sweden, like you know, quite a few years on, and Sweden was a very progressive country compared to, say, Australia, with its ideas and its welfare systems and all the rest of it. So I also wanted to show that comparison too. Yes, there certainly, I did have it in mind at the time that these two stories, the mother and daughter story, were aligned within that experience.
Well, Maureen's father, Eric, Lillian's husband, is, you know, a really selfish man, and it's very hard to find anything positive about him because we really see his thought processes, which probably wasn't terribly different from men at the time, but just that idea that, you know, she was stuck with this man, which, you know, still happens today, but more so back in the 50s, with a man that was a philanderer and a gambler, and, you know, poor old Lillian could only get a washing machine because she was begging for one for years and was told there wasn't enough money. And so her poor hands were red raw, and she only got a washing machine by winning the crossword in the Women's Weekly, which attests to your great sense of humour. I don't know if you actually won a washing machine that way, Cheryl, but I found that very, very funny and very reflective of the time. And then we've got Maureen, who is actually engaged to a Swedish man called Nils, who he starts out having redeeming qualities, but in the end, I mean, I don't know whether he's just a selfish bastard or whether he's just a romantic, weak character. What do you say to that, Cheryl?
Well, you know, I think that's sort of up to the reader how they feel that how they're affected by the character. I think you bring your own experience to a character, and I guess I wanted to make it like forgiving as well as I mean, everybody manages with the tools they're given as a child, sort of. So he had complicated parents, therefore.
That's a mild comment.
He was a shit.
Parents were hideous.
Yeah, definitely was a shit. But but I like to have a little bit of forgiveness along, like, you know, an outage for the characters.
I think that makes them more three-dimensional, which makes the book so enjoyable. And I think even more so than Lillian Eden, I found this even more of a page turner because you contrast Eden and Sweden, and you go back and forth, and you're looking at two generations that are related to each other, and the plot is far more convoluted, for want of a better word. I mean, it really is. You wonder what on earth's going to happen in the end. And of course, as a reader, I was terribly worried about Maureen and how she was going to end up, and the fact that she was pregnant and left on the streets. And that brings me to the wonderful character Netta, which seems to me as a bit of a parallel to Aunt Maggie in the first book. And she is mentioned in Out of Eden, but she's since passed on. She was in her 80s, so that's understandable. But I just want to read you a little quote that I found by a woman called Jordan Tripper, who wrote this very recently about the wise woman archetype. And I'd just like you to comment in terms of Aunt Maggie and Netta. She says, above all else, the wise woman is a woman who values her independence and knows herself well, and seen as eccentric or peculiar, no matter where she appears in a story. She stands apart as much for her free ability to sense true potential and worthiness in those she encounters. So how does that relate to how you perceived both the Aunt Maggie and Netta characters? And did you have in mind that they would both be some kind of a wise woman archetype for both Lillian and then Maureen?
Yes, I did look at the archetype, but I also look at the age I'm at now. And I think that as we get older and we look back with a far more broader sense of life. I mean, we've lived our lives, and that I sort of look at the wise older woman, and I think that's where I'm centered, in a sense that I want to acknowledge that, because there's so much negativity around aging, and I want my heroes to be old. And so I sneak the older woman into the picture to be the hero behind the scenes.
Absolutely fabulous. I love the Netta character, and she's a fascinating character, and her living circumstances is like something out of a Grimm's fairy tale, which I found interesting. So where did Netta's character come from specifically?
Well, I sort of created her. I guess I wanted to, I used the Aunt Maggie image influence, and she was sort of a fabricated character. So I think for that one, I was looking at the older woman and looking at them. Well, as a matter of fact, what came to mind was, if you remember, quite a few years ago, we had this wonderful homeless woman in Melbourne who was a pianist. And she used to go into David Jones and play on the piano. And that always stuck with me, that that this woman was this fabulous musician who just lived on the street and wasn't known at all. And I often wondered what happened to her. So in a way, I used that as an influence into the Netta character.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yes, I remember seeing that woman performing in the streets of Melbourne as well. Yeah. And yes, she has a very interesting backstory, as does Netta. So the fact that where she ends up living, I don't want to give too much away. I'll allow you to give more away. I don't want to be the one to do that. But how did you come up with Netta's living circumstances, which I found absolutely fascinating and a fabulous backstory? Were you ever in a similar circumstance when you were in Sweden?
I could say yes to that. So for a brief term, I know what it's like to live in a loft.
Okay. And I mean, it was such a wonderful initial meeting where Maureen's desperate for somewhere to go to, and she has an Australian friend that's living in Sweden and goes to her apartment, and it really came home to me how the technology of any time really affects the story as well, because I'm thinking, why doesn't she just use her mobile phone? And there's all these people avoiding each other and not, the cross communication. And it was so much harder because she had to go to a pay phone box and she couldn't predict where people were or what they were doing. And of course she gets, there's no one at home because Sarah's away visiting her husband in Switzerland who happens to work on an oil rig. So you're getting the idea of how amazing this story is. It just goes on and on. And for her to first discover Netta, we have no idea that this strange woman is going to become really Maureen's saviour, but at the same time has such an interesting story that means that she's living virtually in hiding. And it's only later on that we do discover not only is she a musician, but she was a very famous musician, and it really reflects on that idea of the older wise woman. You cannot judge someone by how they might initially present, because she had this incredible backstory that you could possibly thought of when you first meet her as a reader. So then going to Nils, who's the boyfriend come fiance, and pretty much like her mother Lillian, she's swept off her feet and hardly knows this man. And all of a sudden, I don't know whether she got pregnant before they became engaged. I can't quite remember that detail. But really, and his dreadful parents represent racism and misogyny. And it's very interesting that it ends up being strangers in Sweden and the Swedish state, as you've mentioned, that are much more generous than Australia certainly was at the time, that really saved her from heavens knows what would have happened to her. So that really brings the story along very powerfully. So I urge everybody to read this book.
Thank you.
So once I've just got some notes here. Once Maureen's situation is established, the reader's taken back to Eden, and Lillian is more independent thanks to Aunt Maggie's inheritance and her divorce from Eric. But her situation doesn't stay rosy for very long. So I'll let you reveal as much as you'd like to about what actually has happened to Lillian in that situation while Maureen's away in Sweden and has no idea of what's going on with her family at home.
Right. Well, Lillian's obviously Eric's got to cause her a little bit of drama. So because he's never given up the philandering. And so I thought it would be interesting to sort of tease all that out. And because I didn't have the Aunt Maggie character, I then used Eric as the, I suppose, the catalyst for her to react on, basically. And she has to find money to help her daughter in Sweden. So through this search for money, there's a lot of skullduggery going on that she wasn't aware of with the ex-husband, and she has to then create a plan to be able to find money, hoodwink him because he's obviously never going to give her any money, and the siblings, the sister and brother, in on the whole whatever goes on in Eden. I don't want to give too much of this away.
No, of course you don't. Of course you don't. But I just think the whole thing's very fascinating, and it's it's very common to the time that men controlled the purse strings. They might give their wife some housekeeping money, but women generally, even married, weren't in control of much of their money at all, and that makes women like Lillian very vulnerable, even though we're in the 60s now. And sadly, it seems that Maureen's brother Johnny, who's the eldest of the children and is now grown up and working as a fisherman, seems to be very similar to his father in some ways. But how did you see him as being different at all, or is he just cut from the same cloth as his father?
No, I guess once again it's the tools. It's what he sees, how he grows up. But I also see that character as being able to, he's now become the head of the household basically, and he's still the young man, so he's only got the tools that he was given to sort of try and help his mother and his sister, and therefore he has to use what he knew. So he draws on maybe what would Dad have done in that situation or whatever. So that's how I played it out. I sort of
product of their upbringing and exactly circumstances. And despite the tragedies, which there is quite a lot of drama and, yes, as you said, skullduggery, there's very grounded humour regarding life and death and, dare I say, bodily functions. And I really like Lillian describing Eric's stick as a flagpole of vanity he never stopped waving, which I thought was incredibly funny. And as I said, the irony of Lillian only ever getting a washing machine by being winner of the Women's Weekly Crossword competition. Did you have fun weaving that humour into your novels, and how aware were you of writing humour into what's a very dramatic story?
Well, yes, I enjoy humour, and I always wanted to make the light and dark in the situation. It's the dark and the cold in Sweden, the humour and the light and the very Aussie, you know, the Australian humour in Australia, to sort of make it as a contrast to the other story. So, and I think too, you know, there's a lot of doom and gloom around at the moment. So I wanted to write something as well that was a bit uplifting and could give you a laugh. So I really did focus on trying to write humour into the story. Yeah, just to sort of balance things.
No, it works very well. And, you know, however disempowered any of the women are, particularly Lillian and Maureen, they're so feisty, and even Aunt Maggie and Netta, they're so feisty, and it doesn't matter how down and out they are, they find a way through, which is, you know, really great to be able to read about strong women, despite their circumstances, can actually find some kind of ground. And I also noticed there's a lot of self-medicating going on in both of the novels, especially by Lillian. We've got the Becks, we've got the brandy, the sherry, the quickies, and the Valium. And I guess today, I guess Mother's little helper would be a bottle of wine, which seems to be the thing that, you know, women with children particularly, there seems to be a lot in the media about that. So I found that really interesting too, because whenever Lillian's got a headache or feeling sick in the stomach, which is often and very understandably so, she's always going for the Beck's powder, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I hope her liver doesn't fail her, but she gets through nonetheless. So the Out of Eden reaches its climax, and there is so much skullduggery, betrayal, and a breakdown of the veneer of civility. Most male authority figures, well-intentioned or not, come across as buffoons in Lillian's world. That's how I saw it. And this seems to contrast with Maureen's experience in Sweden, where a number of men, certainly not all of them, come across as mature and genuine. I'm thinking of the pastor, the lawyer, Bernard, the restaurateur. Can you talk more about this?
Yes, well, you know, we can't write the men off completely. There's some very nice men out there. I have 4 sons and love them all, and they're all very beautiful human beings, help their wives, do the cooking, all sorts of things. So I don't want to malign the male to that degree. And I have met very nice people that helped in my situations as well in the past. So I just wanted to, let them off the hook.
But it was more so in Sweden than in Australia, which I found interesting. I can't, just off the top of my head, think of a male character that was incredibly redeeming. Even the lawyer and the policeman that were helping Lillian towards the end of the novel still seem to have their own little agenda going on, and you know, one of them particularly wanting to bed Lillian at some point and being kept away. So I found that very, very interesting. Also, the plot becomes more convoluted as we go along, especially towards the end, and you tie up all the loose ends very nicely. But how easy or difficult was it to pull all these threads of the plot together, and did you consider other plot endings? Like it was quite a sophisticated setup that you had, that I imagine if I was writing it, I'd find that a lot of work to work all that through.
It was. It was a lot of work, but I did it like I had the thing in mind, the ending, both endings, where I wanted to go with it. And what I did in the end was I I wrote the whole story, and then I pulled it apart, and then I read Lillian's, the Australian section, to see if it all sort of worked through as a story on its own. And then I threaded it into the Swedish story so that everything crossed and wove together. So it was like doing two separate stories and knitting them together, I guess. But
which you did very successfully.
It wasn't easy, but I did find it was a lovely challenge. That's the part I really enjoyed doing, actually, because it's like doing a crossword, isn't it?
Without winning a washing machine.
Yeah, exactly.
And the suspense is really created too, because we don't see Maureen coming home in the first instance. And of course, everyone's relying on the old-fashioned letter, no emails, no mobile phones, any of that. And so, there's time and distance that's really affects the characters and how the plot threads itself through. And as being the reader, I was really kept on tenterhooks with that, because you wonder too if the letters are actually going to be received, because as we know, at one point Maureen's fiance's mother actually held on to all the letters and didn't pass them on, and poor Maureen didn't think her mother was even concerned about her. And of course there's that shame that goes with being an unmarried mother as well. So congratulations. You did such a terrific job, and I had such a joy reading Out of Eden. And I would highly recommend, as I've said, that you really need to read them both together. And I presume that the next book that you're working on is it going to be part of a trilogy, or are we going to have an ongoing series like Phryne Fisher?
No, I think it'll be a trilogy, and it should end there.
Okay. Well, may I say I announce Out of Eden launched.
Oh, thank you very much. That was lovely. That was I'm very grateful, Loretta. It's
a privilege. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Now I know there's a little bit more time, but I'm just wondering, Rachel or Susan, whether there's any questions that.
Well, I think we should let Cheryl read the section that she wants to read.
Yes, yep. Absolutely.
We'll go over to that. You ready, Cheryl?
Okay. I'll start off. This is the part I'll start off in Sweden. It's when she's already on the street and she's now looking for somewhere to live. The exit door to the block of flats banged, pulling Maureen out of her doze and into the cold reality of her situation. Her neck was stiff and her leg had gone to sleep. How much time had passed since she dozed off? She stood up and stamped her feet to get the circulation going. It was stupid to stay here. She should find somewhere warm, like the railway station. But finding the station meant wandering around the streets of Gothenburg, lugging a suitcase in the dark. The idea didn't appeal. Either she had been asleep when the woman with the bucket had returned, or she didn't live here and had only come to collect something. Hunger pangs gripped her, a reminder that she had someone else to think about. What should she do? The sound of feet on stairs, something being dragged, grunts and heavy breathing penetrated her thoughts. Leaping to her feet, she opened her handbag, pretending to search for a door key, when the woman from the roof reappeared. Walking backwards, she pulled the sack onto the landing, then dropped next to it out of breath and gasped something in Swedish. "I beg your pardon," Maureen said, "but I don't speak Swedish." "Getting too old for this," the woman replied in perfect English. "It looks heavy. Those stairs are steep. I'd be out of breath pulling that." A perfect opportunity had presented itself. Maureen could help the old lady and find out if someone had a key to Sarah's. Her stomach rumbled. Maybe she would be offered a cup of tea. "Let me carry it upstairs for you." Without waiting for a reply, Maureen bent down and picked up the sack. It was heavy, crunching against her. It's cold, you'll be filthy, the woman said. Bugger. Maureen dropped the bag on the step and looked down the front of her fawn coat to the imprint of coal dust. It was her warmest coat, her only coat. She held out her blackened palms and screwed up her face. Looks like it's too late now. She grabbed the sack like she'd seen shearers drag sheep and backed up the steps. The roof door was low, not much taller than her. A 6-foot man would have to duck his head. She rested the bag of coal against the door and returned to the woman. The woman looked from Maureen to her suitcase, shivering in the chill air. Maureen explained her situation. I wanted to surprise my friend. Should she admit she's Australian? Last week, students from the University of Gothenburg had burnt the Australian and American flags in a Vietnam protest. I've come from Australia to see her, but she's away on holiday. That's what the man who lives over there said. She nodded towards his door. I don't know where else to go. I've run out of money and have to wait until the bank opens in the morning. It was half a truth, because there wasn't any money waiting in the bank. I was going to stay here for the night. There was a catch in her voice. She indicated the landing and shivered. The woman frowned and stood in silence as though considering something. I suppose I can assist you tonight, but it's only a temporary solution. You'll have to leave first thing in the morning. Maureen's relief was enormous. Anything would be better than becoming a frozen corpse in the slums of a foreign country. If Nils knew what was happening, he would be furious with his parents for leaving her on the street. Without a key to his flat, she couldn't receive his pre-arranged phone call. If he called his parents, she doubted they would tell him what they'd done in case it messed up his chances of winning the yacht race. She'd have to survive until he came back, and this odd lady was offering her accommodation. It was the first offer of help she'd had from a Swede, and she was grateful from her head to her toes. Thank you, that is so kind of you. My name's Maureen, by the way. She held out her hand. Netta, the woman looked at Maureen's proffered hand but didn't take it. You can wash your hands in the downstairs lavatory. I don't have water. Bring the bucket up with you. It's at the bottom of the stairs. She spoke English with a posh accent. She turned and started walking up the stairs to her door. Maureen's eyes widened. Righto. No water? How did this woman live? It would be rude to question her after being offered refuge for the night. Eager to please, she headed upstairs. And now I'll just do a little bit out of Eden. So we'll go straight over to another part of the book where it introduces Lillian. Eric walked into Lillian's kitchen and dropped his bag of washing on the floor as if he owned the place. She sucked air between her teeth and eyed the bag. What did he take her for, a doormat? Lillian noticed that he looked a bit pale around the gills. There were bags under his eyes and stubble on his chin, probably worn out from shagging a young woman. Folding her arms, Lillian gave him a dead eye. Surely you don't expect me to do your washing while you have a live-in maid or whatever you call your schoolgirl? Eric looked sheepish. It's just a few things, Lil. There's only a tub and a washboard at the farm. Lillian's face darkened. Eric stepped from one foot to the other, unsure of himself. A silence fell between them. Lillian's hands went to her hips and she glared at Eric. His feisty Aunt Maggie had taught her well. She was glad of the years she had spent looking after her. A tub was good enough for me. It's all I had for years. How many times did I have to ask you to buy me a washing machine? I had to win a crossword puzzle in the Woman's Weekly to get this one. She saw his eyes go that snake grey. She wasn't scared of him anymore. She strung him out like he used to do her. You can pay me and I'll send the money to Bubs. She's in a pickle in Sweden and needs money while she looks for a job. Lillian removed an envelope from the top of the fridge and took out a page which she handed to Eric. Here, she sent a note with mine. Eric stared at the page, snatched it from Lillian and thrust it in his pocket. I told you not to contact her until she stops living with that boy. It's a disgrace. Lillian's face hardened. Well now, is it any worse than what you're doing, living with your children's schoolmate, Kathy Parker, and her 3 kids? The cheek of him. The gossips are having a field day. Did it occur to you that Splinter is a school teacher? Think how ashamed she must feel with the whole town knowing. Eric's eyes shifted around the kitchen. She saw a flush of red above his collar. It was a small victory. So I could leave it there.
Wonderful. I laugh again and again with your writing, and it's just fabulous. Loretta, did you have anything more to add? And after this, we'll open up for any questions or comments.
I just think it's definitely a very feminist novel, which is fabulous, and the strength of the women and the fact that they have to go between even caring for people that they're not particularly fond of. I think it's just overall, it's a really well balanced novel, and I congratulate you again, Cheryl, on having it published.
Thank you very much, Loretta. And I want to say thanks to Spinifex Press because of their support. It's been terrific, and I always know I can phone you up anytime and you'll whinge at me or tell me what to do and give me a pat on the back and urge me on. Thank you.
The sharpness of that interaction between Eric and Lillian, these sorts of sharp things occur at various points through both novels, actually, and you've got such an eye for those things. So is there anybody who would like to comment or ask a question? We've got about 10 minutes left if we wanted. But you'll need to raise your hand or make a comment in the thing.
Or unmute yourself.
Or unmute yourself, yes.
I just, I'm going to have to go. I'd like to make a comment before I leave, though. Cheryl, I'm not sure if you know who I am. My sister is Teresa Cannon.
Yeah, of course.
And it's a pleasure to meet you and to hear you talk about your book. Teresa gave me Lillian's Eden to read, and I greatly enjoyed reading that, and I look forward to reading the next book. And also, I was very happy to see that it's going to be a trilogy. So the expectation of reading a 3rd book is certainly way up there. So I've appreciated hearing all the comments tonight. And I have passed your 1st book on to a few friends who have also enjoyed it. So thank you for sticking with the writing. And I feel there is a little bit of a connection through Teresa to you and your work. So thank you very much. But I would certainly look forward. I know there's a copy on the way, and I look forward to getting that very, very soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I can see that Fleur Molstad in Norway is asking, Cheryl, will you ever travel back to Sweden?
I travelled back to Norway. Oh, Fleur.
Hi.
Hello. Fleur's my goddaughter.
Yes. Born in Sweden as well.
Yes.
But living in Norway from Eden. Yeah. No, I was just wondering, would you, if you got the chance, would you ever go back to Gothenburg or Sweden, or how do you feel about that?
No, I think things, I don't think I would go back. I've sort of seen Gothenburg and Sweden. There are other parts of the world I'd like to view. I wouldn't mind coming back and seeing you and your mum.
Yes, yeah. We're still here whenever you want.
That would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. My book's still in the mail, so I'm waiting for it. It's taking its time.
I've posted one to Heather, and
Oh, okay.
it'll take, they told me 5 weeks. So
Yeah.
that's because of COVID.
Mm.
Yes. All
Yeah.
postage all around the world has slowed down.
It has. It's like the old days, it used to take 5 weeks.
So in the 60s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'll have to come back to your place and let you read the whole book, because it was so good just listening to you read that little bit.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
You
got me intrigued. I'm really interested in reading it now.
Well, tell your mum to read the dedication.
Well, somebody sent her I don't know. So yeah, we did read it somewhere. I don't know if somebody sent her a picture of it or yeah.
Okay.
She was ever so proud.
Okay.
Okay.
Lovely to see you, and thanks so much for joining in.
Well, it's so easy these days. Just press a button and you're there.
Oh, but you're in Norway. How lovely.
Yep. Okay. Well, good to see you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Fleur.
Any more comments, questions? I can't see any more on the chat.
Teresa's waving it. Oh, no. Yeah, Teresa.
Yeah, I am.
Hi, my name's Sue.
Hello, Sue.
Hi, I just wanted to say Cheryl, I'm really looking forward to reading it, and a bit sort of frustrated that I can't get to a bookshop at the moment to buy it. I did try it, the one up in Glen Waverley, but they do not, it's Robinson's, and they don't have a supply with Spinifex. So
You can order it directly from Spinifex over the website, and we'll be showing all of that at the end when I share the screen.
oh, okay, I'll do that then.
That
Yeah,
might be quicker.
yes, because I need a couple of copies. All right, thanks very much. I'll see you later, Cheryl.
Okay, Sue. Thank you.
Hooroo.
Bye.
Okay. Well, maybe then it's time for me to show that particular screen.
Teresa's waving her hand. I think she might want to say something.
Sorry, okay, she should just speak.
Okay, I'll speak. Cheryl, you mentioned that after your first book, there were many requests for a second book. I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about that, whether you felt it was an obligation or how you felt about that.
Yes, it did bother me, because I thought, oh, am I going to disappoint, if it's just the one story, the one book. So it sort of made me start to think of a sequel, which I hadn't considered before I'd written the first one. And then I realised, yes, I would be able to take it on, just make it 10 years on and create another story and turn it into a sequel. And after that, then I thought, yes, I can do this with a third book as well, because one triggered the other. And initially I hadn't even considered it, but certainly, and then the COVID happened. So I really needed something to occupy myself with. And hence, yeah, I wrote it. I surprised myself.
Good one.
And there was a lot of pressure. I did feel I should write the second one.
Well, it was so seamless, Cheryl. It really feels to me like you had it all planned all along.
No.
Gee, so well done.
No, I didn't.
Just for one more thing about ordering a copy, if you use the special code free post, if you're in Australia, then you will get postage for free. And there's a special going on for ordering both books. So please do go to the Spinifex Press website if you haven't been able to get to a bookshop. Renata, would you like to come in?
Hello, everyone. And hello, especially Loretta and Cheryl, of course. That was really delightful, Loretta, to listen to you, very close reading of the story. And in fact, there was something in it that I must have not taken in, because you said something about the husband being away in Switzerland and something about oil rigs. That really passed me by. Is that true, Cheryl?
Yes, he was in Scotland working.
Scotland,
Yeah.
because in
My
Switzerland we
apologies,
have a
Scotland.
sea. Yes, yeah.
I got the S right.
So that was really fantastic, and congratulations, Cheryl, of course, to this book. I mean, I feel that Pauline Hopkins, who is also here, I think, although she has a sniffle today, she has a cold, and I have actually lived with this book for quite a long time, and probably made life for Cheryl sometimes a bit, I don't want to say hell, but probably she occasionally thought, God, can't they just leave it? Because both Pauline and I are a bit obsessive. And so there were bits in the book, whether it was punctuations or whether it was theirs. I'm not going to tell you the story, but there's a car journey involved. And I said to Cheryl, no, they can't go to Switzerland. It's just not the right way. You wouldn't drive to Switzerland like that. Make it Austria or something. And poor old Cheryl then was trying to to change the journey where they drove. But anyway, it was a very, very riveting story. And it's interesting, Loretta, that you asked Cheryl about the ending, because we had a few only slight variations on what we would like to see the ending to be. And of course, you know, let's not forget, Cheryl is the novelist, and we're only the humble editors. But as it is now, it's perfect. And we all got our way, I think. I hope it's also the way that you wanted it, Cheryl. The other thing I wanted to say is that, interestingly enough, a few people have said that they thought Out of Eden was an even better book than Lillian's Eden. And I find that really interesting because of the Maggie character in Lillian's Eden, that, you know, it was so very special. But I think, and you got a great endorsement from Amanda Laurie, who actually says the book also features that rare thing, a lively and unsentimental portrait of a truly good woman. And of course, that's Lillian. And you do this so well, because Lillian deals so well with that awful Eric and all his stupidities, and then he gets sick and blah, blah, and she looks after him and whatever. So she is a truly remarkable woman, and no matter that Maureen, you know, her offspring, is also a really good, decent woman. And of course, we're all terribly much looking forward to the trilogy ending, to the third book. I have not asked you yet to send it, because at the moment we have so much to do, and we were until last week still really into getting Not Dead Yet, our very big anthology coming out in July to the printer. It's called Not Dead Yet: Feminism, Passion and Women's Liberation. It's a book with 56 contributions by women over 70. You had to be over 70 to be in it. And Cheryl, of course, is in it, and her contribution is really one of the funniest, because you really have a very good nick for writing humor into your stories. So I hope you will all get that fantastic book. It really will be a good doorstopper as well, because it's 67 pages or something. 64 pages. It's very big, yeah, and has a very big spine width, and we're really looking forward to it. And of course, there will be other Zoom launches. So as always, at the end of a launch, I want to thank the Spinifex team, which is Marilyn Damiano, our office manager, without whom we would not exist. Pauline Hopkins, who, as I said, did a lot of editing on this book and is a fantastic person to work together with. Rachel McDermott, who is actually here, and she too is, she's our promotions manager, and she too is just a wonderful member of our team and is very good with everything digital. Caitlin Roper, who I think is here too, who is our social media person from Perth. Great, Caitlin, that you could join us. And
Sharon.
Sharon, who is Marianne's offsider and helps her with keeping all our
warehouse.
She's the warehouse manager. We should actually give her a title. She's the warehouse manager. And of course, Susan and me, who are the dog bodies, and our dog Nala, who has remarkably stayed silent, which is not always the case. And again, my particular thanks go to Cheryl and also to Loretta. And I really urge, here comes Nala, who actually has had dinner, because otherwise we would not have had any peace. And we're very, very much looking forward to the third book. But before we do that, please all get your copy and have a good read. And also I was thinking, you know, for those who maybe live abroad, and it will be some time until the book arrives, although we will send it out also from England. That should be quicker. You could always buy an ebook. And that, of course, is the quickest of all. You just go to the Spinifex website and you click and you got it and you can start reading. So I think
hold on, Renata. I need to load them. I'll load them tonight so you can all have an ebook.
Okay. Don't try it yet. Wait until tomorrow. It's only one more night's sleep, and then you can have your ebook. Sorry, Rachel. It's been a lot of work recently for all of us. So yes, tomorrow you can have your ebook and you can have your immediate click experience and load it down, and it's cheaper also. So thank you for that, and thanks to all, and have a very, very nice evening wherever you are. And those of you in Melbourne, commiserations on the lockdown again, which looks like it might be even a bit longer, but we don't know that yet. But, you know, in case you like the tennis, Channel 9 actually transmits the tennis from 8 o'clock this evening, and you can see Ash Barty. So if that wasn't planned, it's not really the book launch, but never mind. We should also laud our female Australians like Cheryl. Okay, thank you very, very much. Have a lovely evening and enjoy both books, but especially now the new one, Out of Eden. And thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Loretta. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Colleen is here too, I think. And I will now go and depart this space.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.